Welcome to Translation Confidential. This is Peter Argondizzo, and today I have the honor of our guest, Lyle Vold, CEO and co-founder at USKED. Lyle, welcome. It's been a couple years since we've had you as a guest.
Yeah, I think it's a 3 going on 4.
Yeah, boy, time flies, that's for sure. So I'm happy to have you back. I know you've got some updates for us on your platform, and we're going to have a good chat about a bunch of different topics. So let's get started. I know you're working on a new release. Tell us everything.
Sure. So,
Maybe
Peter,
start
great
with
to
what your company does, because of
yes,
course,
right.
if they didn't listen a few years ago, they won't remember. So tell us a little bit about your background,
Sure.
why the new mission from your old mission. Tell us a
hmm
little bit about everything.
Sure. Peter, good to be back. Good to see you. So, yes, my name is Lyle Vold. I am the CEO and co-founder of USKED. So, USKED is a scheduling platform. It came of the interpreting space. I myself wasn't. I I don't call myself an interpreter now, but I was a career interpreter. I still do interpret for friends and family, of course, as many of us do. But I started my career as an interpreter. I founded an agency called Access Interpreting, and then we built this scheduling platform to support our agency at the time in the mid 2000s. So, 07, 8, and 9, there were none. There were none that you could buy off the shelf. There was one, if I remember right, and it was some very early stages. So we built it. And then years and years later, we spun it off, and USKED was born in 2018. And we have been licensing it to other agencies. We license our product to corporations, Fortune 50, Fortune 500 companies, universities, nonprofits, and they all have a different need for it, but they all have a need, right? They all have this need to manage from a corporate perspective, and from a university perspective, it's a request management platform, right? I have these requests that are coming in. This idea of data ownership and source of truth is very important to these customers. And so they become vendor agnostic, right? So they can use whatever vendor they want. They can capture their own requests and they can route it to vendors of their choosing, especially for a corporation that's across, that might be global, right? So one vendor is not usually going to be their solution. So if you're not capturing all the requests in one vendor's platform, it becomes very difficult to have this source of truth, right? So that's how we serve them. And of course, the the interpreting agency, the LSP agency, is our bread and butter. This is where we came from. This is what we know. This is how this is how the world and the solution or the problem was presented to us through the eyes of the interpreting field, and that all still today makes up the largest count of logos on our website.
Wonderful. And is your company also, quote unquote, providing the marketplace as well? So in other words, if I'm a vendor or if I'm an LSP and I decide to buy your software, certainly I can backfill and add my interpreters. But what if I'm a newer LSP and all of a sudden my business takes off? Are you providing a marketplace as well where like freelancers and independent people can plug in as well? Or tell me a little bit about that part of it.
Yeah, it's a great question. So the short answer is yes, but the way a marketplace is established is it can be established in a number of different ways, right? So we've gone the route of interconnectivity, right? So so that way licensee sites can speak to each other. They can trade, exchange requests, backfill for each other, but we set up the marketplace to be from agency to agency. It's a choice that we made. Some of our competitors, they see it a little differently. They see it more as, an interpreter coming in directly or getting routed to stuff directly. To do that, I think the underlying principle for us is we are not a service provider. Right? We are the service provider to the service provider, right? So service is very important to us. We understand the daily challenges of the service providers, but we are not one. And so for us to create a marketplace where freelancers could come directly in, that means we would have to become a service provider to get the revenue, to get the volume of jobs in. That's not the way we want to go, right? We want to strengthen our customer's position, not weaken it, our licensee's position and not weaken it. And so how we strengthen it is to allow them to communicate with each other, allow them to enter into business agreements together, and then make that connection as seamless and as fast as possible. And that way, on either side, the bill pay is correct. There's no, we're not dealing email anymore. Oh, change the name, cut all that out, just put it in the system and it shoots over. So this does create a marketplace, especially for, let's say, a corporation or a university, right? So if a corporation or university says, okay, I buy your platform now, I want to connect to my vendors. These vendors have our platform. This is a piece of cake, right?
Oh,
So it
I
is a
like that.
marketplace. Yeah.
I like that approach, Lyle, because I think, just thinking through my own business implications, because, I'm thinking, that takes the vetting away as well, because essentially now you may make some friends. In other words, like, wow, they have some great vendors in their marketplace. Or on the flip side, it could potentially tarnish your name because
Yes.
sometimes poor vetting happens. You do all the things you think you're going to do, but an interpreter sneaks through that doesn't quite do what they need to do. And I like what you're doing because it seems like you're creating more of a network amongst your clients, which is really good. And that does pass the burden on to them. I like
Yes.
that. I like
Thank
that.
you. We kind of have a inside. Oh, it's a joke. What inside saying. Said you wouldn't want to crowdsource your commercial airline pilot, would you? Right?
Oh
You'd want
gosh.
somebody to vet. You'd want somebody to vet this pilot. Some company that was a legitimate company. You wouldn't want them just to be like, hey, cheapest available, give them fly the plane, right? So
I mean, Lyle, don't get me started. That's really like one of the reasons why we started this podcast, 300 years ago, is because that's one of the dirty secrets I think that sometimes people don't realize in our industry is that the operators that operate at scale, I'm not going to mention any names, but one of the ways that they source projects is, well, they have 3,000 French translators or French interpreters, and they literally put a job spec out, and the first person to raise their hand gets the job.
yeah,
It's
from a system automation's perspective, this is the easiest way forward, right?
wonderful.
Zero thought, click, you get it.
How does
Right?
that saying go? Just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do something,
That's so
right?
funny. Yes.
Because that's exactly it. It's
Yeah.
from a business perspective, gosh, and you can even make it, reverse Dutch auction and say, hey, whoever bids the lowest and raises their hand the fastest.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, oh, great. I mean, from a business perspective, it sounds wonderful, but we all know from those that are responsible for quality that we wouldn't do that because that's not so smart.
And and I do, if this conversation kind of flows naturally as I feel ours in the past have, I know that we were going to discuss challenges, or if I were to change something about the field, right? It's something that I look at and I see today, and I would say it is the value or the understanding that the value of an agency, like why are agencies valuable? And I feel that in the market, this has either been forgotten or not as clearly defined. And to me, right, an agency is there to ensure I think that there are four, I wouldn't say any, but most in interpreting situations, translation situations, there are four stakeholders in this. You have requester, who's paying, client, who's getting it, service provider, who's providing it, and then you have the operations behind it, right? I call it company, right? The company. And agencies are there to ensure all four parties get exactly what they were promised. They all got it, right? And that takes work, right? That takes work because an interpreter was promised a safe work environment. Interpreter was promised if they're on an assignment with somebody else, that they qualified co-interpreter and that they get paid on time, right? These all take systems. They take screening processes. They take bill pay processes where you can project what they can get them paid fast, get them paid early in some cases. And without agency, there's no way we would be able to provide as a whole, as a market, the amount of interpreting services that are consumed by the world, by the United States alone, if we want to just say that, without organized people, right?
I love that viewpoint, Lyle, and I think that there's not enough time spent on those points, especially thinking about all aspects, all stakeholders, including the people doing the work, right? All of us that are in this business, I think, don't think enough about our engine, which is the interpreters, the translators, the desktop publishers, then going to agency side, the project managers and the people that vet. And I think that water's been even more muddied, I would say, by the advent of AI, which we're going to talk about next.
Of course.
And I think one of the things that we're seeing, and I saw it come back from a client comment earlier this week. We always follow up on our quotations that we don't win. We want to learn from everything.
Sure.
So our sales folks always follow up with, hey, what happened? We want to learn. Did you go with another vendor or just not do the project, or what happened? And the feedback that we got from a client was, well, yes, as you know, we compare your services to multiple vendors. We bid this out, including a self-service translation platform.
Mhm.
So I'm like, okay, we need to dig down on that. So what we're saying is that on my side, if I don't do a good job of scoping the product, right, or the project, and saying, well, if we overscope it, we say we have two humans with no AI
Mhm.
versus they go to an app and say translate, and they're not understanding sort of that sausage making process that literally is just someone spilled it to the API at OpenAI and took the
Mhm.
content back. It's apples to oranges, right? It's not a fair comparison.
The output is they're not even in the same category.
Exactly. And certainly for some use cases, that straight AI thing might work,
Yeah.
but there's been no consideration to that. And I think not enough people spend time considering what you just talked about, Lyle, is that I think that focus has gone away as like, what sort of workplace is this provider providing? How do they treat their vendors? Are their vendors loyal? Because as a customer, right, I want to know that the people doing the work are well treated, and that when I go back for another opportunity, I say, hey, I really liked that interpreter, or I
Hmm.
really liked that translator. Can we work with the same folks? Well, no, because we burnt our bridge. We didn't pay them on time. We
Right.
fought them tooth and nobody wants to
Yes.
hear that, right?
Nobody wants to hear that. They want to hear, yes, in fact, this interpreter's been with us for years and would love to come back.
Yeah,
That's what
absolutely.
they want to hear. And so you know, um, there's it's interesting because new legislation was passed in the previous administration right at the end to prevent AI translations from being used for government documents and also in the medical setting. It has to be right. So they felt the need, right? Even though regulation is a bad word, especially in today's climate, but there's just guardrails, right? Like if you're looking at it, if you need an interpreter, then you cannot vet the end product. Likely.
Absolutely.
Right.
As a client, many of our clients say, hey, thanks for the translation. It looks good. I don't
Yeah.
speak Chinese, or I don't speak Japanese or Italian. It looks good. Thank
Yeah.
you. They don't have the
Very
ability. So
beautiful.
that's a
Yeah.
great deal of trust. Or, if
Hmm.
an administrator comes to one of your providers and, they provide ASL interpretation or language interpretation, they're trusting that your end users are doing their job, they're doing their vetting. But I love the focus on the engine. I like that. So if I'm hearing that correctly, Lyle, so in your system, you make it easy for the agencies to pay their vendors, to
Hmm.
basically handle the ins and outs of every transaction, is what it sounds like.
Yeah. And so one of the things I think it's a reflection of our experience, right? Of our experience and relationship with the field. We went to great lengths to make our platform as easy for the end user, the service provider, to use, right? As make it easy for them to work with us. That was the original design, right? If we make it easy, then people will come back and work with us more. And so build all my jobs. One, click, click, done.
Love it.
All 10, everything's billed. I'll get paid in 2 weeks or whatever the pay period schedule is. Right. Let me see everything that's available while I'm sitting on my couch and looking at next week or 2 weeks or next month or however you do it. Right. And just look. Yeah, I'm interested in this one. I'm interested in this one. So on and so forth. Get followed up with. And so when you look at the world through those eyes, you say, okay, the purpose of agency is to ensure that everybody gets what they paid, what they were promised. The buyer gets what they paid for. The client gets exactly what they need. The service provider gets fair pay and a good work environment and convenient good work environment. And the agency is compensated for its work in the process, right? And so the system helps address life to each of these groups and then make it, pull it in the way that's efficient for them and translate it to what is efficient for the operations team to be able to manage. That's fundamentally the answer to the problem. It can be any number of strategies to do that, but that is the problem that any system is looking to answer.
I love that, Lyle. That sounds great. Well, let's transition into that topic of AI. It seems like most of our podcast episodes these days touch on AI in one form or
Sure.
another. But tell us a little bit, because we're starting to hear some noise. Obviously, it's affecting the translation world. I mean, I laugh because MT's been around for a long time, right? So now the addition of
Yep.
AI adds some complexity and certainly adds some abilities. Some welcome, some maybe not so welcome. But how about in the ASL world? We're starting to hear that there's some movement to try to create some solutions using AI. Tell us a little bit about what you're hearing, or is any of that a reality that you think might happen, or what are you seeing, Lyle?
Anything's possible, right? I think history and technology has told us that, right? And I not all, but many of the inventions we see today were, in Star Trek episodes in the 60s and 70s.
That's right.
It's like, if you can imagine it, eventually it will come to be. And so I do think anything is possible. I do think in terms of the progression of AI, which is, coming at in just an order of magnitude rate that I don't think we've seen, and I'm not quite sure we even realize. The general public realizes how fast AI is scaling in terms of its capabilities. But what I have seen are avatars that can output language, right? But I've not heard, although it's not to say that it doesn't exist, I just haven't heard of anything that can read input, right, using AI. So it's two-way communication. So yeah, sure, take this, let's say we use English, take this English sentence and have an avatar sign this English, in ASL, produce this sentence in ASL. This is something I've seen, right? I've seen this can be done. My smart TV's got an avatar at the bottom of it, literally, that's signing the menus, which I thought was pretty cool. I did not know that. I did not know Samsung had that.
Interesting.
But they do. So if they can take the input is in written form, and to some degree even speech recognition has gotten better, they can make an avatar have enough of a language library to produce an interpretation, right? I think it would be, I don't know that it's any better, or I don't know that it's any worse than some of the other languages, right? And the output would just be a spoken language. But going the other way, right, it's different, right? We're going from a completely different medium, right? Going from text and speech, where we have good technology for, and then image capture, yes, but video capture is much harder, and to identify video. And I think that technology is coming, and once they can do that, then two-way becomes possible.
Interesting. And I would imagine that potentially could impact your business, where you might need to provide the ability to schedule time on a server, I guess, or whatever it is, on a service. So that'll be interesting. I know that we're seeing for like meeting support, right? That stuff already exists either, with Copilot, or there's plenty of tools. We recently signed a partnership with Kudo, so we're using Kudo on a platform for meeting. Like, we could be in a meeting like this, and we could have subtitles. You could say you're a Spanish speaker, and you'll only see Spanish subtitles. Or if it's one-to-one and it's quite controlled communication, you can turn on audio prompts, and it's pretty good. But again, like all of these solutions, right? Whether we're talking, to me, it just seems like, using the right tool, the old adage of a sledgehammer when you need a ball peen hammer, or vice versa. It's like using the right tool in the right spot and understanding what the limitations are is going to be what the key is.
Guardrails.
Yes, exactly. Which are a good thing, I think. So I know we kind of stay away from political discussions, but I think obviously, because we're essentially in language access, there's been some assaults on language access. I think people didn't fully understand. I'm speaking to my friends that know what I do for business, but didn't necessarily connect the dots on, hey, if they define English as the official language of the United States, what does that do to my friend who owns a translation business, or my friend who owns an
Hmm.
interpretation business and a business that
Hmm.
schedules interpreters. What's your take on that? I mean, we still have the Civil Rights Act of 1964 that offers some protections, but what is your
The
take? What are
ADA
you?
as well.
Yes, the
Right.
ADA as well.
Hmm.
Yes, absolutely.
Right.
What have you seen? What have you seen? What have you heard? What are you hearing in your client base about language access?
Well, so as you know, I'm a Washington D.C. native, or a DMV native. I'm sitting blocks away from the Capitol as we speak today. This is where my family is, my business, my friends, where I've been for what I've called home for a lifetime. What I told my staff, the morning after the election, I said, regardless of who you voted for, right? The whole point is we got to be able to work together. That's the whole point, right? You can't. No one person, no one group can do it all. And as somebody that has seen many, many, many administrations come and go, it matters less who is in the White House than people think, right? It really, the day in, day out, the civil servants that do the work, that keep the lights on, and keep our citizens protected and safe, are truly what makes the government and frankly the country work from a livable perspective. So now we've got the Gulf of America instead of Gulf of Mexico. Okay, these things, it's like, what, I don't, this is temporary, right? Maybe it sticks, maybe it doesn't, I don't know. From a language translation perspective, when I speak to my licensees that primarily focus on ASL, so I mentioned the ADA. The ADA is what gives ASL interpreters, has created the industry of ASL interpreting, right? And without the requirement for reasonable accommodation before, it was all people like me, right? My kid can hear, so just, can you come and just interpret, tell them what I need to know, or whatever, or a brother or sister or something like that, family member. So, for now, the impact that I'm seeing on the ASL space is that if folks are losing their job, and those folks happen to be ones that were receiving interpreting services, we are providing less interpreting services, right? But they don't stop. They are still deaf. They still have bills to pay. They still need to go work somewhere. And so somebody's going to still have to, provide a reasonable accommodation for this person. So, in our journey to support this particular community, let's say, we just need to be available for when they enter the workforce and wherever they go, and make sure that they're ready to, we're ready to hit the ground running as soon as they are. So long term, I'm not sure, right? Like, as we talked about before, it feels a lot like a balloon with gel in it. You squeeze one side and the other side gets bigger. You squeeze this side and the other side gets bigger. So these people are still in a world that need it, right? The world still has 180 languages, and they all need to talk to each other, right? Like, this is not going away. It doesn't matter what we say our official language is. These other ones don't disappear. Um,
Yeah, I agree 100%, Lyle. I think unfortunately the issue sort of got tied to what they view as the immigration crisis. And I think the two really are, because we have plenty of immigrants that are here legally that are still struggling with our
all
language.
of us have somebody in our family that was an immigrant that was here legally.
Absolutely. I mean, my parents came over in the 60s, and I can tell
Yeah.
you it was a different place in terms of language access. And, my
Yeah.
father tells the story of when he landed in New York and he needed to get to Chicago, and he went to the train station, and he's, in Italian, he says, "Do you speak Italian?" "No." "Do you speak French?" He had traveled all over. He lived in Switzerland, so he spoke a bunch of languages. "Do you speak German?" "No." He said, "I speak English." So my dad, gets his little pocket dictionary they had out and said, "I need a paper for Chicago." And the guy's like, "Oh, you need a ticket to Chicago."
Yeah.
So, that was his
Yeah.
learning journey, and that's where it
Yeah.
started. But the fact of the matter is that there's still, like you say, all these
Mhm.
people that have needs. And those of us that are in the industry have to figure out how to still provide those. And our client base still has to figure out how to provide it in the face of perhaps reduced funding, and I think that's going to be our mission, is to help people further their budgets just so they can get through this period. I think it's really what it
Yeah. I
is.
mean, I don't know what good language deprivation has done anybody, right? I, it, it's,
It's not assistive. I mean, there's no way that if our goal truly is that we want people to pursue the American dream and
Yes.
help them become part of our culture, our environment, productive in the workforce, then if we can provide some level of language access, that's how we get them there. That's how my folks did it. That's how all the other immigrants that came through did it. And
Mhm.
when folks need interpretation, it needs to happen, right? So, well, thank you for weighing in on that. I
Yeah,
appreciate that. So let's talk about one quick thing, because I don't think, admittedly, in our podcast, I feel like we don't cover ASL enough, and I'd like to get your
sure.
opinion on one quick thing. Well, it doesn't have to be quick, but a point that I think we don't cover enough. What are some misconceptions people have about deaf culture, or the deaf community? What do you see as like the number one thing you're like, okay, well, you're not exposed to it, you're ignorant to this? What's the one thing that if you could educate the masses, what would be the one or two things that you would say, hey, that you should really know this about this community?
My answer today, ASL has really had um, a good run in the public eye. I'd say, Coda being a movie that
Mhm.
that won all the biggest awards, right? I think it was best movie, best supporting actor, at least those two. And so then and even before that, you had Nile, right? Who just these things are just like putting ASL in general in the eye, like in the eye of the general public. And I think in each of those instances, some of these, like, I guess I see now, like, Niall won or I think he won Dancing with the Stars. Like, how did that person do this, right? Oh, you can feel music, right? You can learn the steps, you can feel the beat as long as the bass is up. My answer before that would have been, oh, can deaf people dance, or can they drive, or can they do these things, right? And so I think a lot of it has to do with assessing the ability to do such, right? So, for example, my father, who's deaf, sought and achieved a pilot's license. This is possible. And I interpreted for the lion's share of his training. And this is possible because 90 some percent of all airports in the United States are uncontrolled airports. So you don't have to use the radio. You just go to these airports that exist all throughout the country. You enter into a standard traffic pattern, right? And look for the other planes and take your turn to land and do the same for takeoff. This is how 90% of the airports are operated in the United States. So airspace is regulated, so you can tell somebody that you're going to go through airspace, tell them when and what you're, I think reaching back here to my vocabulary, but I think it's what you're squawking, right? So the number, so they know who you are.
Mhm.
And you can navigate the United States doing this, right? And so this idea that, oh, because I can't hear, I can't do, is commonplace, right? Well, if I can't hear somebody honking a horn, then I can't drive. Like, this is not true. Right? Anybody who's listening to music or driving down the road knows that, yes, it's assistive. Sure, in life, hearing is assistive, but it's not a requirement. And so, this I will say truly, the recent exposure to ASL in popular media, extended over the last decade, I would say, has been a breath of fresh air. It's been great.
I love that, Lyle. And one quick thing to share is I recently went to, actually, it was last year, the ALC conference in
Yeah.
Montreal. It was really great because I met 5 agency owners that focus solely on ASL. And I'm like, I think the last ALC event that I went to, I don't know that there was any
Yeah.
representation. So the
That's
fact
right.
that there were 5 agency owners and they were talking about their businesses booming, which I love to hear that.
Mm.
So, from my own very limited perspective, I took that as a really good sign of that the industry is obviously growing. Like I always say, that just means there's that many more people that are getting the assistance they need when they need it, right?
Yeah.
So if we're drawing a
I mean,
contrast to when we started,
it's top 4 languages used in the United States, right? A lot of people.
see, it's
A lot
another
of
point
people.
that people wouldn't know.
Yes. Yes.
That's a great fact. Thanks
It
for
was on
sharing that.
Jeopardy. Yeah.
That's great. See, that's another way to
Yeah.
get access is you get the
That's right.
questions on Jeopardy. So Lyle, we're at that point in the show where we typically wrap up and we talk about our biggest takeaway from our conversation today. What's your biggest point or the biggest takeaway that you have from what we talked about today? Or even any other point you'd want to reinforce?
Sure. So, I would say for, those that are listening, as somebody that, is here, and I'm not an insider to any of what is happening. I'm blocks away from where I sit in the government. But I would say don't sweat the small stuff, right? This too shall pass. And, when what this is to me and how is the biggest pot stir in recent history, right? And stirring the pot creates opportunity, right? So look for that opportunity and see if you can rise to the top. That's how I would, my parting words to those that are concerned about the environment that we're in. I'm going to take the silver lining because that's all you can do. As it pertains to, we didn't spend much time talking about the exciting stuff that we have coming out. Maybe that's another podcast. You and I get talking and we run out of time. But we've got some really great tools and some really great stuff to support agencies and corporations and universities and soon hospitals. And there's a great scheduling challenge that's happening in hospitals right now that we are looking to launch a pilot next month. So a lot of exciting stuff. If anybody has any questions or curiosity, everybody at USKED is up for a good conversation.
I love that, Lyle. We were supposed to talk about that. Well, when I know that you're very close to release of the next version, why don't we schedule a time to chat? And actually, we do a lot more with video now, and we've not done this before, but I can have you share your screen and you can actually walk us through a few things. I would love that.
That'd be great. I say we do it.
Yep.
I say we do it later this year.
Yeah, that sounds perfect. You let me know when you're ready and we will do that. Now, if anyone's interested, Lyle, how can they reach out? What's the URL for your website?
So USKED.com, USKED.com. Just launched a new website, and so I think it's a little clear how we face the market, and then you can contact us there. If you want to book a demo, that's fine. If you just want to have a conversation, that's fine. We're more than happy to do it.
Wonderful. Great. Well, I would say if anyone's interested, find Lyle Vold is VOLD. USKED.com is where you'll find more information. And we'll look forward to, doing the demo and talk about the features and the different things you've got going when you're ready for release of this version, Lyle. And for me, the biggest takeaway is just it's always great to have a conversation with a friend in the industry. And it was nice to go over some of the challenges that we're all facing. And I love the ending with a positive aspect of it, Lyle. I love that take on it. I think that's what we all have to do. There's certainly headwinds in many forms, whether it's legislative or AI or whatever it is, but that's sort of business and we just have to work our way through it, right? So
absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for this episode of Translation Confidential. This is Peter Argondizzo and Lyle Vold signing off.